Hi, my name's Jonny Marshall, and you're listening to the Ask People podcast with Savio Rocks.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Ask People podcast. I'm your host Savio Rocks, and today I'm humbled enough to have Jonny Marshall here, who is a web developer. Hey Jonny, how are you?
Hi, Savio, I'm really good. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem.
So I'm going to get straight into our first question, which I always ask every guest on the show, which is, tell me a little bit about where you grew up, your background, and what influenced you to be a web developer.
So I grew up in West Yorkshire, specifically in Huddersfield. And I guess from a young age, I was always definitely a very technical person. I was always someone who liked to tinker with computers and, take things apart a little bit and, kind of do hacky things on computers.
Yeah.
But I actually found at a young age, even though I was really interested in those things, I didn't feel like, I think maybe things have changed a bit now, but certainly at that time I didn't feel like it was very nurtured in schools.
Yeah, that's true.
IT skills just were not really seen to be real skills, I guess, at that point.
Yeah,
it was almost like,
totally.
If you were into IT, it's like, oh, are you, maybe you're into gaming or something, but it wasn't considered a serious skill. So I kind of, even though I grew up doing a lot of techie stuff, I never really did it much on an academic basis. It was always more of a private kind of like hobby, really. So eventually I didn't really pursue that path initially. I went much more down the kind of visual arts path. I was really into kind of films and documentaries, and I ended up kind of going on to study filmmaking at university eventually. So I was kind of moving towards like a career more in like visual arts, which after university I did. So I worked for around 5 or 6 years as an editor and motion graphics designer, primarily like in the advertising industry.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Before then kind of moving into technology, after that and becoming a web developer. So kind of like came full circle in the end back to essentially my interests growing up as a kid. Not to say by any means that I'm not still interested in visual arts. I definitely am. But it's nice to kind of come back to some of my earlier like passions, I guess.
No, that makes total sense. That's really cool. For the people who don't understand what a web developer is, could you explain to us, Jonny, what a web developer is and what they actually do?
Yeah, so it's kind of a broad term, really, web developer, because there's a lot of different...
That's what I thought.
There's a lot of different things you can be doing. Obviously, there's a lot of different languages. I think probably the main way you could break it down is between being a front-end developer and a back-end developer. And then someone who would basically cover both of those areas would be termed as a full-stack developer. So the best way really to kind of explain each of those individual roles would be a front-end developer generally does things which you're kind of like seeing in terms of you're not really dealing much with databases and servers. It's much more about laying out web pages, interactions, and the kind of user experience side of things. And then a back-end developer would primarily be concerned with data. So obviously they interact with each other, but a back-end developer will be much more focused on the data that's going to and coming from the database, whereas a front-end developer doesn't tend to have so much concern in that area.
Okay. It all sounds technical to me, and every time I think of it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm blown away, because I believe that you have to have a lot of patience to be able to do what you do, because you're seeing things over and over again. Is that correct? And you're going over it. How is that for you?
That's definitely true. I think it definitely takes a certain kind of a certain kind of personality type to really get into it and to not be kind of frustrated by it, because quite often you're dealing with bugs and kind of little things which can take a long time to resolve. It could be that you're missing some essentially a punctuation mark or something in your code, or you have a really small typo which can take a long time to diagnose. But obviously, if you're someone I think who likes kind of puzzles and things like that, and who likes challenges and that you kind of are passionate about those kind of things, I think being a web developer, it definitely kind of speaks to those types of people, I think. So yeah, you know, like there can be times where you feel like you're doing things over and over, but normally, and this is one of the great things about coding, is that normally as you get better and stronger at doing things, you can kind of reuse stuff that you've done before and work faster in the future. And that's one of the things I like about it. It's definitely a very like scalable kind of role, in that once you do something 2, 3, 4 times in a row, you kind of think, oh, you know what, I've done this quite a few times. I can kind of like reuse this in the future, and you can kind of reuse your components, and sometimes you can, you know, set up projects which you might kind of use that as a template for future things, because you just kind of like get an idea for how you're going to be reusing things. So there is some repetition for sure, but I think that as time goes on, you actually can kind of factor out a lot of that repetition and then focus on you know, more like unique or interesting challenges.
Well, what made you realize that you actually have a talent to be a web developer? Because I know you were is it motion graphics?
Yeah.
You done motion graphics as well, but what actually? Because I know before we started the podcast, we had a brief discussion about it. But what made you realize that this was your talent also?
To be honest, I actually didn't really know that there was going to be a talent there. Before, I had spent some time kind of tinkering around with like front end. So I'd worked on kind of building websites for myself, or just doing kind of little bits of front end work, but I'd never dealt at all with anything to do with like back end developing. So when it kind of came to making that switch, I actually had no idea how I was going to fare. And I would say that I had a much bigger learning curve actually than a lot of people. So I did a course called La Wagon, which is when I studied it, and it's a Fullstack Web Development course. And I think compared to other people on the course, I actually felt like I had to put in a lot of work to really keep afloat. It went at a very fast pace, and I don't think that by any means I was a natural at it. But, you know, like anything, I think you don't necessarily have to be a natural. Sometimes people need more time, sometimes people need less time, but there's no kind of prerequisite that you're going to immediately be able to pick it up and quite quickly progress. That certainly wasn't my experience.
Oh, no, so, and what you just spoke about education. And one thing that I always do like to speak about on the Ask People podcast is education, and how important you think it is for yourself, and also for the people who are listening if they wanted to get into web developing. So in your aspects of things and in your opinion, do you feel like education for doing web developing is something that people should have, or do you feel that people can do it naturally and just have the talent to do it without being able to go to school? But here's the catch. A lot of companies, maybe you might be able to tell me this, a lot of companies, when they're looking for people, they're looking for somebody who has experience, but at the same time they want somebody who has an education. How does it work for you when you are going to look for a job in what you're doing? How does it all work?
I mean, that's quite an interesting thing when it comes to like web development specifically, is that there's actually a lot of people who are web developers who don't have any kind of computer science background. I think I need to kind of double check the figures, but I think it's something like 50-50. Like half of people do actually come from a computer science background, have gone on a very traditional educational path to get there. And a lot of other people have come from different industries. And I've actually found that if you have a bit of a different background, it can be quite valued. So I don't think that education and specifically studying to do it is by any means like absolutely necessary. I also think when it comes to web development, there's so many great resources online. I mean, even compared to when I was doing video editing and motion graphics and that kind of work, yes, there would be tutorials and things. I could learn things online, but it was often quite difficult to find exactly the content I wanted or exactly the thing I needed to learn. I feel like if you can on Google or YouTube and like Udemy and things like that, there's so many really, really great courses that you can teach yourself. You can get yourself to a really good level from doing it. So even though I actually went and paid to do a boot camp, I feel like at that time it was right for me, and I kind of needed the structure, and I needed the dedicated time and some of the kind of teaching support and stuff around it.
Yeah.
But having since that learned kind of other languages and other ways of programming, there's so many kind of great resources online that I'm not sure that you necessarily even need to do that. If you're willing to take the time and be committed to self-learning, you can do it. And some of these courses are completely free. I mean, I would say you could, for at best maybe like £100 or something, would get you enough resources to become a full stack developer.
That's actually quite good.
I don't think it's prohibitively expensive, at least not compared to a lot of other industries.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So I know you spoke to us about the process of being a web developer, but another thing that I would like the listeners to understand for anyone who wanted to get into web developing is, what do you need to be a web developer? Like the equipment. I know we spoke about the courses and the software, but is there anything else that you need to be a web developer in the terms of it?
No, I think that really it just comes down to obviously internet access is a really good thing.
Totally.
But I would say most people have internet access, but if you don't, libraries will have internet access and you can use them for free. They're a great resource. The obvious thing is just having access to a computer, but you don't by any means need to have a really top of the range computer. I mean, actually, the equipment that I was using for video editing, motion graphics, I needed far better kind of equipment than I did for doing kind of web work. So really, you're mostly working in just in applications where you can code, and they're not that difficult. And sometimes things will take a little bit more time doing installations and things like that if you've not got a great machine. But you're only talking about a matter of kind of minutes of difference in kind of installing things or whatever. So I think that really if you have a half decent computer and internet access, really that's all that you need.
That sounds really good. What inspires you to do this? So is there anyone out there that inspired you to actually do this, or even your motion side of things when it comes to doing things? What inspires you, or who has inspired you to keep doing this?
Actually, so one of my really good friends was the one who inspired me to do the course, and he was working and still works in a similar line of work doing editing and motion graphics, so we kind of knew each other through that business. And he had built a kind of full stack web application from doing this course and kind of showed me, and it just seemed to me almost like magic. And I know that a lot of people kind of sometimes look at things like the internet and how websites are built, and it almost just seems so crazy. It almost seems like just like magic, because you look at it and you're like, I don't understand what can be happening behind this that enables all of these interactions. And I definitely felt the same. And I guess really for me it was when I seen my friend build his application, having really had no experience with it and gone and done a boot camp, and then been able to build something that he understood, and he kind of understood at least the fundamentals. Might not have been the greatest application in the world in terms of, maybe it wasn't capable to be released there and then, but certainly the building blocks were there to build upon and kind of build something really, really new and innovative and interesting. So I guess really that was a big part of my inspiration. So I went and decided to do the same course. And then really that whole kind of like demystifying process started into action almost from day one. You really kind of just unpack everything and you take it back to the base building blocks and say, okay, how does things work at the most basic level, and then you keep building an these kind of abstractions on top of it, and by the end of it you say, okay, like I understand how this is working front to back. Now that's obviously specific to full stack web developing. If you're going to do just front end, you might not necessarily need to know so much about back end, or if you're just going to do back end, you don't necessarily need to know all about the front end. But I think it's good to have an idea of both, and it definitely can be demystified if you're willing to put in the time and learn it. These kind of things, which to me definitely seemed kind of just like magic before like attempting to learn it, it like very quickly that commitment will be a good payoff, and you'll start to realize that you can learn this stuff and it is possible and you can make sense of it, and it's just a matter of time and having the commitment. I mean, having good mentors also helps.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, was there anyone who actually mentored you through the process for you to be where you are today?
I would say that the person who was the kind of key teacher on my course has been like quite a good mentor. I always feel like I've been able to kind of reach out to him for like advice and guidance. And really, I wouldn't say that obviously he would probably be like a main mentor of mine, but I think really when it comes to coding, there's a great community out there for learning and a great community for getting help and things like that. So there's so many Slack channels, and things like Reddit are a great resource, and Stack Overflow. These are all just like fantastic resources where people just give their time for free.
Yeah.
And want to help other people. And I do think that kind of that process of like teaching other people seem to do that a lot for free, and there's a lot of meetups and things like that as well where you can kind of meet people and
that's true.
and get help
totally.
in person. And I definitely feel like in when it comes to like technology and web development, that exists to a much greater degree than I experienced kind of coming through the creative industries. Not to say that it didn't exist at all, but I wouldn't say that it was quite as easy or quite as available to just get loads and loads of help. And I think somewhat that just it's because it's a necessity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of giving help and getting help, everyone kind of benefits from that process. So I think that everyone needs to learn, and everyone, helping other people is a good way for you to learn, and it's also a good way for other people. If you want to employ someone, it makes sense that you want to impart your knowledge so that they're up to speed. So
of course,
I think that there's reasons for maybe why it's evolved that way, but I certainly feel like there's a great community where mentors might not be one specific mentor, but you can kind of tap into a lot of different areas and always get help where you need it, really.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. What was your first project you ever worked on, and who was the company or person that gave you that chance to be able to show your talent?
So actually, the first project I worked on professionally was it was for it was kind of building a financial services website, and I think really the job came very spontaneously. It was actually kind of just a random meeting with someone who is a friend of a friend who we were just kind of like having a beer somewhere, and it turned out that he was a developer, like the lead developer, and we got talking a lot of technical stuff. And I feel like maybe he had enough beers to almost give me a job on the spot, and it was definitely I definitely lucked out on that on that particular kind of conversation.
It helped.
Because I mean, he just really quickly he said, just send me over your CV, and which I did, and then got a job. But there was a huge learning curve. I didn't feel like I was particularly ready to take on that job. But okay. I always think when it comes to these things, saying yes to things and then having to learn fast is better than saying no.
No.
Like maybe you're going to occasionally disappoint a few people, but mostly people recognize the effort you put in anyway. So I just think say yes to things, even if you have no idea what you're getting yourself into, and then, just work hard at it and see what you can get to. And if you're having trouble, people seeing that you're putting in the effort is worth more than anything. So even though I was definitely having to probably work twice as much as I should have to get this project done, the fact that I was doing that was kind of respected, I think, by my seniors who were saying, well, look, he's not necessarily got all the skills necessary, but he's doing the work at least.
Is there anyone that you admire within the industry that you work in when it comes to their work? Is there anyone that you would say that stands out to you? Because we all have someone, regardless if it's music or fashion, stylist, it doesn't matter what it is, but there is someone in that particular industry that stands out for you. Is there anyone that stands out for you where you can say this developer is really good? I know I don't understand obviously as much as developing as obviously you would because you're in the field, but is there anyone that stands out to you and you've got inspiration from them within your work?
Definitely. So I think I think people from various kind of like coding languages would probably may know of this guy anyway, called Brad Traversy. And
I'm always looking up people, so I'll definitely look him up.
Right. So basically he has a YouTube channel, and he does just tons and tons of free tutorials. He's got, I think, a couple of paid courses as well, but most of the content is totally free. And he has a very, very interesting story of how he's got to where he is. And he's done a few kind of videos that are a little bit more about where he came from and where he got to. And I think, there was certainly issues of like addiction in there. And then he kind of really managed to turn things around in his life. And coding kind of really, I guess, helped to turn things around for him. And now he's trying to kind of pass that on to other people. So he's got fantastic tutorials, but also just his own journey, I think, is like inspirational for anyone. It just goes to show that, no matter who you are and kind of the struggles that you might be facing, like getting into something like coding, if you're interested in it and if that's something you want to do, there's very few barriers for people if you're committed to it. So I definitely think that will be someone who I think has one of the most kind of inspirational journeys, and now he's very like well respected in the community. He's had kind of a series of very successful businesses, and managed to kind of scale himself up as a developer to a quite a successful level. And so yeah, he would probably be my number one.
Yeah. Okay. So would he be someone that you would love to work with? If I said to you, you can choose one person that you would love to work with, would he be the main person for you to say, yeah, I would love to work with this person?
Possibly, yeah. I think that there might be another person who I might
go on, tell me.
There's someone, and he goes by DHH on Twitter. I can't remember exactly his name. I think it's David. I forget, but he's very big in the kind of Ruby on Rails community, which is my kind of primary programming kind of framework. And he actually kind of was one of the initial people who made Ruby on Rails like a thing, and kind of I'm not sure whether he completely invented it, but certainly it was very, very small, and he did huge amounts of work on it to get it where it is. But he seems to be someone who really has not only done really great things when it comes to technology, but also has a lot of interesting ideas on kind of work-life balance, and he's very big on remote work, and he's quite opinionated, and sometimes people can be a little bit turned off by some of his opinions that he can be quite vocal about, but I definitely think that he has a lot of really interesting insights, and the way that he believes that code should be, he's all about kind of code should kind of like look beautiful and it should feel good to code. You shouldn't be kind of you shouldn't be looking at your code and not enjoying the process. He believes that you should be nice and beautiful and very kind of formatted in a way that you enjoy coding. So I definitely like agree with that. I think that he has some pretty interesting ideas which I tend to agree with. So he would be someone that I would definitely like to work with, because I think it would just be interesting to work with someone who really cares so much about the craft of programming. And certainly when I'm coding, sometimes I'm like, things are just getting a little bit like tangled up here, and you can't quite tell. I have to put a lot of energy into formatting things, and I feel like he's someone who would be really, really super on that. And so I think if I had to work with anyone, it'd probably be someone like him to make sure that everything is done properly in the right way and to the right standards.
Do you ever feel like you're under pressure when you're doing your work? Because we know that it takes a lot of patience. Do you ever feel that you're really under pressure? What do you do when you feel stressed within your work? How do you calm yourself down?
Yeah, that definitely happens. I mean, normally I find that like when I'm coding, sometimes I can get really in my own head, and if I'm having problems with something, sometimes just kind of walking away it's amazing how
Yeah.
much clarity that can actually bring.
Yeah.
So sometimes
true.
just walking away and just saying, okay, look, I'm going to take lunch, or I'm going to go out for a walk for 20 minutes. And during that process, it's almost like, oh yeah, all of these things that were kind of whirring around in my head have started to fall into place a little bit, and I'm
Yeah.
able to come back to it and continue where I left off, and
Yeah.
to try and kind of resolve my issue. So I think that just taking regular breaks is definitely very important. But I would also, I've definitely struggled, like in the past sometimes, with just getting like flustered with things and just going down this tunnel of just being like, oh God, I'm just getting anxious and not being able, and kind of just, it can sometimes just kind of, it's like a domino effect, and you kind of keep
Yeah.
going further and further. And I think sometimes actually just say, if I'm doing client work, for instance, just saying, look, I'm having trouble with this. Can we have a conversation about this, and can we go over things?
Yeah.
I think conversations always help. I mean, generally everyone's working to the same goals, and if
That's
you're
true.
if you're struggling, people are there to help out. So
Yeah.
I think that's the main thing, is just knowing when to stop and say, look, I'm a bit in too deep, and also just taking regular breaks.
If there was one film or animation out there or motion picture that you could choose to represent you, what motion picture would you choose, and why would you choose that one? I know it's a random question. Yeah. It could be a film, it could be even a music video, but something that represents who you are.
I don't know. I've never thought about that.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite film?
Oh, my favorite film, The Lord of the Rings.
Okay, does that have anything to do in the sense of inspiration or represent you in any way, that the reason why you like The Lord of the Rings?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I guess probably one of the themes in that movie would be the idea that okay, so yeah, I think probably in that movie one of the key themes which appeals to me is the idea that even when it looks like there's kind of no hope, there's literally like nothing that can be done, there's huge armies with just hordes, and that it's just kind of insurmountable, they still say, would rather kind of go down the ship fighting the right fight rather than just switching teams. And I guess I think that is probably something, obviously it's an extreme example of it, but that's something you could apply really to things like career and things, is if you feel like the work that you're doing doesn't speak to you and isn't a reflection of who you are and your own values, it's better to kind of respect that and respond to that and make a change, rather than necessarily just sticking with it and saying, oh, I'm excelling, because sometimes you can excel in something and it's not necessarily exactly in line with your own virtues. So sometimes I think just saying, look, what are the things that I want to work on, what are the things that excite me, and what are the things I kind of believe in, even if that means sometimes taking a pay cut, even if that means doing something that you're not so familiar with. I think that's the trade-off. Yes, in the beginning it's very, very scary, but actually I think it has a greater payoff over time.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who is just starting out in web developing or motion graphics as a designer? What advice would you give them? Because they might feel a little bit lost and don't know the right direction of what to go in or how to find work. What would you say to them?
I think the first thing would be kind of having a bit of a personal brand is really, really important. So I would say if you're going to be a web developer, make sure that you have a developer's profile somewhere on the internet, just some kind of online resume or something that just kind of it is about you as a person, has some of your portfolio work in there, but make sure that website is some of your best work. Don't neglect that website and just say, okay, I've got these cool portfolio projects. Make the first thing that people are going to see, try and wow them initially with that. And that doesn't necessarily mean, okay, I'm going to have loads of crazy animations and you come onto the page and you've got sound effects or any kind of gimmicky things. I think just having something that's really nice and clean, that works, it doesn't have bugs, that's things like mobile responsive is important. So have a developer's profile that if someone clicks it in an email, it's not going to, they're going to look at it on a mobile phone and be like, oh, this person doesn't know how to make a website. And I think that just putting in that kind of work, just making something kind of, I guess, robust that people are going to see is important. And then in terms of the kind of portfolio work that you show, I think it's not so important that you have like lots and lots of work there, that, you know, you say, okay, I've got loads and loads of projects. Just maybe like a couple that are actually fleshed out and, again, are kind of working and are good to show off. I think that's like a more important thing, is just to have work which is good, even if it's a couple of projects. Also, getting involved with things like meetups, I think, is really, really useful. I still think even in the world of kind of LinkedIn and all these online ways of getting jobs, and obviously kind of job application websites, I still think that being able to meet people in person still has a lot of value. So if you want to get into it, not necessarily just coding, but whatever it is, there's probably going to be some community out there where you can meet people who have been doing it for a few years and you can have conversations with them. And I think as long as you're kind of interested and curious and you know, like, respectful and things like that, you can have a good chance of, essentially, I can't remember what the word is, but when you're not going through the main means of getting a job, but you're kind of like almost coming in through the back door a little bit.
Okay.
That sounds seedier than I kind of want it to, but, you know, essentially there are ways.
It works.
Yeah, but, you know, there are ways of kind of essentially escaping rather than going to a job that's got hundreds of applications. If you can meet someone and maybe get them to offer you a job, you know, or at least maybe some freelance work or some kind of initial contract. That's a good way of getting your foot in the door without trying to, you know, kind of put yourself up against 100 other CVs going into an inbox.
No, that's really good advice. I haven't heard someone give advice like that before. That's really nice. How would you say that you push boundaries within yourself to make the people around you work better and harder? What would you say that you do?
I think one of the things that I do is I try to always have a vision before I start off on a project of what I want it to be like.
Yeah,
rather than allow the project or I guess my abilities within the project to dictate what it should be. So if I'm going into a project and I want something to if I want a certain feature or I want to build something out, rather than saying, okay, can I build this out? If not, okay, maybe I'll change it a little bit and tweak it. Just having a really clear idea of, okay, this is the thing I want to build, and if I don't have the skills for it, I'm going to learn those areas. And sometimes it's difficult to even learn the areas because it's like, okay, where do I even start to learn it? And then you can go out and ask those questions. And it's almost just like kind of having a bit of a series of steps for yourself to say, okay, once I've reached this hurdle, what do I need to do to get to the next hurdle? And there'll always be another hurdle. But I think trying to do work which you actually, you know, you have a vision and you want to create something, and just sticking to that, that's a way that I think anyone can kind of like push themselves. Yeah,
that sounds cool. What's the best memory you've had to this point, up to this day, in the work that you've done? So if you had to pick one memory.
I think
He's smiling.
I'm wondering, should it be a good memory or a bad memory?
No,
you say the best memory?
It could be any memory that just resonates with you, that you remember. It could be, so you can find it funny as long as it does something for you.
Yeah, so I guess like kind of when I was in kind of my first days of working as a web developer, I remember having this moment where I was kind of coding up a website, and I just realized I was getting further and further away from what I wanted, and I just was having so many issues with it, and it was just going so fundamentally bad, and I was just, so there's this, you've heard of imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah. I
had just a serious case of imposter syndrome, and I was thinking, oh my god, what am I doing here? I'm a failure, and all of these things, and I just kind of, I couldn't even sit in the seat. My heart was kind of racing, and I was like, oh my god, I felt like I was getting like an anxiety attack, and I was like, I just got to get up and walk around, and I walked around, and then luckily I talked to someone else who was there, who kind of like could just see that I was in distress, but I didn't want to kind of show it. I didn't want to be like, I'm just having this huge kind of meltdown. And he was like, look, is it things okay? And I was like, not really. And he was like, okay, well, look, let's just chat it through. And we chatted through, and like after that chat, things just kind of like cleared up. And I think it was just a reminder for me that like everyone has these problems, and sometimes you feel like, oh god, I'm so out on my own here. but definitely having experiences like that, I always think back to them. So every time that something's going wrong, I always think, okay, well, that was probably the worst I felt, you know? That's like my benchmark for, okay, well, I'm not quite there. Even if I'm having a really bad day and everything's going bad, it's like I'm not at that point where I think I'm going to get fired on my second day of the job kind of thing. So I always try and, you know, take these experiences and not necessarily think, okay, that's a bad experience, but to kind of like try and switch it around and say, you know, I've had that experience and managed to kind of like get through it and turn things around, and over time things get easier. And I think sometimes you can forget, like especially when you're kind of working more at like a junior level, sometimes you want to be as good as everyone else around you, and you don't ever want to feel like you've got to ask for help and things like this. But it's totally natural to do that. Like especially kind of working as a developer, you're going to have that experience a lot. And I think just kind of recognizing that and just saying, you know what, like I'm just as long as you're kind of like not immediately saying, okay, I'm going to go straight to ask for help. If you've tried and you're really, really stuck, just kind of getting your questions kind of like clear and concise and saying, look, I'm having this issue. Can you help me with that? I'm having this issue. And as long as you're kind of concise and not just taking up loads of unnecessary time with just tons of questions throughout the day, and you've really tried to solve it yourself, like everyone is understands when that happens. So yeah, I guess like that would be kind of like one of my more defining memories is like just having a real meltdown. But everyone has them, and you know, you kind of just take it as part of the job, really.
No, that's true. No, that's totally true. Here's one for you. If you had infinity money, okay, so you have an unlimited amount of money, what would you change within the web development industry?
I think I would say that I think it's important to teach people at a younger age. So I would say giving people access to learn to code at a younger age. I mean, I can't say I know too much about the education system. Certainly when I was coming through it, there was no option to do any kind of coding before university. There was just you couldn't do it. It didn't happen. So I would say probably either putting that money into getting people who can teach in schools. I think sometimes it's quite difficult to coach people from coming out of working in the technology sector to go and teach. But actually, like I think that if you can, you know, like essentially pay teachers to be willing to go and do that and pay them like a really good amount, I think it would turn things around massively. So I would say either doing that or I guess some kind of charity endeavor where you could have like access for people who are kind of underprivileged and aren't able to learn these things, or aren't necessarily able to pay for courses, or maybe courses isn't right for them, to be able to do a boot camp like I did. Like I was lucky enough to be able to self-fund that, but it would be good for kind of underprivileged people to be able to get some kind of access to that kind of teaching, because you know, I think that it would be really good for the economy, but it's also really good and empowering for the individual as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of thinking about it, because would you say that web developing is expensive all round? Would you say that anyone can afford it, or would you say that it is quite expensive?
I think anyone can afford it, but obviously that comes with caveats, right? So like if you're kind of 16 years old and you want to learn to be a web developer, but you have to contribute and go out and get a job because you've got to pay money to bring home, because you've got to contribute towards food or whatever, or towards the rent for your family, then, you know, you might find that you just have no time. If you're, you know, at school studying, and then you also want to be able to come home and you want to be able to do some online learning or something like that. But if you've got to go out and work in a bar or something to make ends meet, then it's going to be very difficult for you to find the time. So I think in that case it can be difficult, but in terms of it's more of a time thing. I actually think that if you can afford the time, which obviously time is related to money, then you can learn. I don't think it's kind of prohibitively expensive, but if you can you know, obviously if you are able to afford the time, I think that anyone can do it with, you know, like within reason. Like obviously having access to a computer is going to help you a lot, because trying to do these kind of things on a library computer, you know, if you want to go into a library computer and say, oh hey, I want to download these languages onto the to be able to use them on the computer, I need to install this and that package. And
Yeah.
libraries aren't necessarily, well, probably not going to give you the ability to do that. So having your own computer is very, very, very important, I think, so that you can actually get the tools that you need. So I think that would probably be the biggest expense. The actual training is not. I don't think it's too bad in terms of how much you'd have to pay to train yourself up. I think that within a few courses on Udemy, I mean, there's actually lots of free courses even on Udemy, and certainly on YouTube you can get free stuff. I think the paid courses generally are better, but I would say, you know, mostly they're costing probably between £10 and £15. And, you know, maybe if you just get a handful of those, you can probably learn a good enough amount to get yourself a job, and certainly get yourself a few good portfolio pieces off the back of that learning, and then get a job down the line.
Well, that's really good knowledge to know for the people. That's really good. Define what success means to you, Jonny. Everyone has a different definition of what success means to them, but what does success mean to you as a person?
I would say working on something that is meaningful. So for me, I think working on something that I feel like I'm making some kind of difference in the world, that's kind of useful and has like utility, and also being able to kind of realize like my own potential. So I think like always learning and being able to continue learning. I mean, I'm not sure whether if you're someone who enjoys learning and enjoys kind of growth and development, I'm not sure that you ever reach a point where you say, okay, that's it now, like I'm done and I'm happy with where I am. I mean, maybe you're always chasing that, but I would say continuing to learn and develop, work on something that is like meaningful to you, and that you can kind of realize your own potential. I would say that's probably the kind of cocktail of things.
Yeah. It's hard to define success because we all have a different, like you say, a different interpretation of what success is. So it's really nice to hear somebody else's opinion on what success is. Was there ever a time where you felt like you wanted to give up on something? Like you wanted to give up on what you was doing? I know we spoke about you being in an awkward situation and you having someone to talk to, but did you ever feel like there was a situation where you literally felt like you were by yourself because you didn't have money, you didn't have support, things just weren't going your way? What did you do to come out of that and go back to where you are now?
I would say that, I mean, I at one point I did kind of have a bit of a, this was before I was a web developer, when I was kind of working in the creative industries. There was a point where I basically left my job completely, because I essentially kind of felt like and this was quite early on in my career, and really like most conventional advice would have said, okay, well don't give up on the job or whatever, kind of stick with it. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily giving up, because after that I went freelance and then just continued freelancing for the next 5 years. So it wasn't necessarily completely giving up, but I think that giving up, I guess, is okay if it's for the right reasons. I don't think that it should be necessarily one of these things where you say, okay, never give up, because it depends what your reason is for giving up. If your reason is, you know, in the case of when I left the job, it was that I wasn't getting like enough development. I was being kind of worked way too hard, but doing very menial tasks, which I kind of didn't feel I should be, not that I shouldn't be doing them at all, but I felt like none of the work which was kind of interesting or would have been good for my development was coming my way. And so in that particular case, I thought, okay, well, this is right to kind of walk away from it and then seek out better opportunities. But I think that if your reason for giving up is this is an insurmountable task or the hurdle is too big, I would say that that's really where most of the growth is anyway. So I think I always try in those situations not to give up. There's certainly been times where I've wanted to, and where I've been, you know, I mean, I've had it where I've worked on projects and the whole thing has just kind of fundamentally broken, and the database is corrupted, and all of these things are kind of going wrong. And there is certainly moments where you just think, I'm so, you know, you start off trying to fix one problem, and then that in trying to fix that, you reach another problem, and before you know it, you've forgotten what the original problem was, because you're kind of like 5 bugs deep and you just don't know what's going on. And there's definitely been times where it's just like, God, I just want to hit the reset button on this.
Yeah.
But coming back out of that, I think not only is it a good period of growth,
Yeah.
but it also kind of it gives you kind of an ability to it essentially gives you more confidence in yourself. Like if you're able to dig yourself out of a really big hole, you come out of the other end of it and you say, okay, like that's given me confidence that even when things look really, really bleak, I can come back. So I would say, it's not that you should never give up if giving up is for the right reasons and you're doing it for the right reasons, but certainly giving up because you can't do something or something like that, like it's much better to try and work through that and take it on the chin and just have a really bad day of it, but then at the end of it come out feeling more confident and more
That's true.
proficient at what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's really true. Is it true that you worked on commercials as well?
Yeah.
So here's a really random question for you.
Okay.
You ready?
Sure.
If there was one commercial out there that you wish you made, what commercial would you choose? Why would you choose that commercial?
That's an easy one, actually. So,
it's easy. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
so there's a I feel like I might get the brand wrong, but I think you'll recall the commercial. I'm pretty sure it was for Grolsch.
Okay.
But I could be wrong on that one. But the advert is called The Great Escape. So like whatever it is, and it's some kind of beer brand. And basically the ad is you might remember this. So the ad is there's a bunch of kind of guys who get taken by their like spouse, their girlfriend or their wife or whatever, and they all go to a kind of like what do you call them, like a beauty spa thing.
Okay.
And they're all in there, and basically obviously the women are loving it, getting the massages and stuff, but the men are hating it, and they're getting like hot rocks put on their back, and they're like and they're there's just a bunch of things, they're in exercise classes and they're hating it, and then there's kind of a moment where they're all in the changing room and they hatch a plan to try and escape from the from this for them it's like a prison, but obviously it's basically like a beauty spa, and they essentially they dig a hole, and it has all of these kind of shots of them shaking like gravel out of their trousers and stuff, and eventually they dig their way out, and they kind of punchline essentially is they dig their way out and they're like cheersing and drinking the beer. And when I saw that ad, I just thought it was so clever. It's like really great narrative structure, it's funny, like it's relevant to the product, but it's just enjoyable. Like for me, if you can watch a commercial and not feel like you're watching a commercial, feel like you're watching a little short movie or something, and something that you appreciate, cool. It's got a good payoff, like I think that's I have my criticisms about advertising, but advertising like that I think is really, really genius.
Okay, now you got me into it. What's your criticizing part about advertising? What makes you want to criticize the advertising?
Yeah, so I guess like I think that to a degree advertising has become quite distanced from what people actually want. I feel like a lot of advertising is kind of living in a bubble a little bit, and I think that they don't necessarily recognize that some of the things that is kind of being hatched up in, I say hatched up, it's maybe a harsh term, but that's happening in these kind of like meetings between like various people, like account management and client and things. I think what they want their brand to be, for instance, perceived as is not necessarily how the consumer perceives it or ever will perceive it, and there's just quite a rift between that. So I think that some brands, I would say some brands that are doing advertising really well would be something like Red Bull or GoPro. Like these are brands which they recognize what their users want. Their users are into like cool sports and things like that, and that's what they don't say make everything about their product. They say we're all about like extreme sport, and they make things about that, and I think they just know where they stand in the user's eyes, whereas I think that a lot of brands seem to just not recognize how they're perceived by a user. And there's just, a really great example was the Kendall Jenner, is that the one, the Pepsi one, where there's like I think I remember that one. Yeah, it was like really it was quite famous because I think the ad got pulled, but it was kind of there was essentially all these protests going on, and people were holding up signs saying like join the conversation, and like just kind of generic stuff that was essentially meaningless, and then at the end she's kind of like drinking a Coke and Pepsi, I think it is, and there's like these kind of police security people are kind of like joining in drinking this Pepsi, and it was all just very, very contrived, and that's an extreme example. I'm not saying by any means that like all advertising is as bad as that, but I do think that was just an extreme example of something which is quite pervasive in the advertising industry, which is just that the brands and the people that they're trying to represent, they just don't quite understand their audience, and that basically means that essentially I think what it comes down to is they think that their audience is very, very invested in the brand, and they're actually not. And rather than just saying, okay, our audience is, if our audience wants to drink Pepsi, it's not necessarily about our Pepsi. Like we can do other things that they are interested in and be a part of that, but trying to make everything about us and put ourselves at the center of everything as if people care, I think is just a mistake that's done often in advertising. So that would be my criticism, but obviously there is some great work out there as well. There's still brands and agencies doing great work. So I just feel like maybe it's getting less so. The actual good work, I think as kind of years go by, I think I'm seeing less and less work which I'd really go, wow, that was like really, really awesome. So, and I think maybe that's because of budgets and things like that, and also things are moving away from TV. So I think that, these kind of longer form ads where you're getting a 60-second ad, I mean, when everyone is really like using like Instagram and things are getting very much more condensed down to, 5-second spots, and you can't do very interesting work with that, I don't think. So that's probably one of my disappointments with it. But again, not to say there isn't good work. There is still some great work going on.
If you weren't doing what you were doing now, Jonny, what would you think that you would be doing?
So probably, I think, if the only other thing which I'd really kind of wanted to do outside of technology was making documentaries. So I would say if I could have, my life over again and go into a different area, it would be making documentaries, because, it's something I was always interested in. And initially when I kind of went and studied like kind of filmmaking, the view in mind was to go into documentaries. And that kind of never really panned out, I think, for various reasons. Partly my interests changed, but also I felt like that industry was very, very difficult to get into, and full respect to people who manage to do it, because quite often you have to work for next to zero wages for quite a long time. You're talking about interning for kind of like 2 years even to just get a foot in the door, and I feel that it's a very, very hard industry to get into, and obviously, and it's also very, very London centric, and not coming from London, if I move down here, I've got to kind of pay rent and things like that. It's not so easy. I think
it's not easy. It's not easy in London.
Yeah, exactly. So like unfortunately, I think it favors people who are already living in the city,
wealthy,
who are able to not necessarily have high expenses and things like that. So, but obviously it's not to say that's all it's down to. I'm sure people like who do it some people go into it because they're just really, really great at what they do, and they excel and things like that. But yeah, given my time again, I'd probably that would be something I'd love to explore, because I really like documentaries as an art form. I think they're awesome, and it's a great way of balancing like artistic work with doing something meaningful and doing something that's kind of changing the world, like in a positive way mostly. Investigative journalism, things like that, I think is like really positive for the world.
See, it sounds so good hearing stuff like that. So my last question for you, really, well, I have 2 more for you. What would you say to people who follow you, or people who are in the same kind of area as you, to inspire them to keep pushing forward and doing what they're doing, no matter what's going on in their life? Because we all have things going on in our life that sometimes we don't have control over. But what would you say to them to uplift them, to give them that positivity to keep on going?
I guess what I would say is, try not to kind of look at things and feel that you couldn't do that. I mean, there's so many things in the world where I think people look at it and say, okay, I could never do that. Maybe that's that you look at a car and you say, oh, I could never work in designing automobiles because look at how incredible that thing is. Or whether it's a website, you look at a website and you say, I could never build that, look at how, that must be so complicated. But everything starts with one step, and nobody ever gets it straight off the bat. And really everything in the world has been made by sometimes an individual, sometimes a team of people, but it always has to start somewhere. And I think that trying to change like fears of whatever that thing is, in terms of I could never do that, try to change that more into curiosity of saying, I don't understand how that thing is like that. I'm going to try and investigate it, and I want to learn this, and I want to learn that, and I want to learn this other thing in order to give me the knowledge of how that can be done. And I think that when you shift your focus really from being daunted by something to being curious about something, that's when you get much more empowered, and you can kind of start to move towards your goals.
Yeah, that's really good information to give someone. Finally, here's one for you, Jonny.
Yeah.
I want you to plug yourself. Yeah. So where can we find you on all your social medias, your Instagram, your Facebook? If someone wants to look for you to find out more information about you, where can we find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at JonnyMarshall3, which is Johnny without a H. My website is johnnymarshall.com. I actually need to do some work on it, because at the moment most of the stuff on there is kind of motion graphics and editing, so I need to get some more of my kind of more recent like web work on there, but that will be on there soon, so maybe not by the time this is out, but hopefully not too long after. johnnymarshall.com. And yeah, that's it. Or LinkedIn, I'm also Jonny Marshall 3 on there, so feel free to add me on LinkedIn and ask me questions.
That's cool. Jonny, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Ask People podcast again. And thank you for letting me pull out all your knowledge to share with the people on the Ask People podcast. You've been great. Thank you so much.
No worries. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you guys for listening to the Ask People podcast also. And please remember, you can subscribe and listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and any other platform that you prefer to listen to. Please also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can share us again, and also you can donate to the Ask People podcast by simply going to the Savia Rocks website, or you can go to PayPal by simply typing in paypal.me/Ask People podcast. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Always remember to stay happy, stay positive, and continue to be kind to one another.
Didn't expect it to go that well on the first time, but all right. Yeah, great work, by the way, like on the podcast and everything. Like, as you've done a really good job. It's like super professional. So yeah.